I'm Roberta Dwyer. I'm a veterinarian at the Gluck Equine Research Center at the University of Kentucky. And today we're going to talk about the basics of a first aid kit that you should have at your stable for your horse. You can go out and purchase a commercial first aid kit for horses that are readily available at tack stores, on the internet, and they have certain items in them for every different kit. There's a different set of items that are in it. You can go to the pharmacy and buy everything that's in the first aid department. Or you can sort of customize things. I'm just going to cover some of the basics and you can tweak them for your needs, but these are just some of the very basic things that are necessary to have. It's always good to have a cell phone, because if you have an injury to your horse, such as a laceration, most of the first aid things are going to be centered around lacerations, eye injuries, potentially an acutely sick horse. You're going to want to be on the phone to your veterinarian. And for you to safely administer first aid to your horse, you're probably going to need someone who is capable of handling a horse. So calling the next door neighbor, calling down to the house to get a relative or a friend to come up to help you handle the horse while you're administering first aid is always a good thing. You not only want the phone number of your veterinarian, but also a couple of other veterinarians just in case this is a dire emergency and you really need to get someone out to your horse in a hurry. Cell phones are great. Another thing is a piece of paper and a pencil, because if they say, I can't come out but call another veterinarian, here's their phone number. How many times have you been around and you don't have anything to write on, let alone trying to remember a telephone number? So this is good not only for writing down telephone numbers, but also specific instructions that a veterinarian might give you to administer first aid to your horse while that veterinarian is on their way coming to your farm. Other basics, you should know how to take the vital signs on your horse, temperature with a digital thermometer, pulse or heart rate. Having a stethoscope is a good thing to have around so you can listen to heart sounds, respiratory sounds, and gut sounds. Being able to illuminate things with just a very small handy flashlight. This would be very easy to carry around on trail rides to you, so you can look at things just in case it's in a very dark area, like between the front legs, between the hind legs, or there's something that's very small in a thickly coated horse and you really want to sort of see what's going on. A small flashlight works out very well. Another thing that first aid kits are very good for is for lacerations, whether they're on the main body of the horse, or we generally think a lot of the lower leg is being affected by lacerations, abrasions, or a rubbing off of the surface of the skin, thereby opening it up to bacterial contamination. And some things to have on hand for that are gloves. These are not sterile gloves, but one brand is what type is a nitrile glove, and the other are what we're all used to using around the barn areas are latex gloves. Some people are allergic to latex gloves, and you don't want to use latex gloves if you're allergic to them. Latex gloves were made to prevent bodily secretions from getting on your hands and to prevent things that are on your hands, like bacteria, from getting into another animal. But they're not good for things like chemicals, such as petroleum jelly that you might use, let's say, on a thermometer, or to prevent scalding on the skin underneath a draining wound that has got a significant discharge to it. Anything that has a chemical, whether it's petroleum jelly or disinfectants, those types of things, you're going to be wanting to use a nitrile glove, which is made for a better protection of your hands and your skin from chemicals that you would use on an animal. So those are some basic things to think about, because if you're dealing with a wound that's potentially already dirty, you don't want to be adding to that contamination by using your bare hands. If at all possible, have some of these gloves available for use. Having a hand sanitizer is even better, where you can really reduce the bacterial load on your hands, and you should be washing your hands or using a hand sanitizer after you're handling horses that have some sort of injury that might be bacterially contaminated. There are many articles that you can read on learning about first aid for different types of lacerations and wounds to horses. I'm just going to go over some of the basic supplies that are good to think about having in that first aid kit. One of the first things is what to put directly on a wound. There's 1,000 different types of wounds, from ones on the lower leg to ones over the fleshier parts of the body, such as the shoulder, the neck, the croup. And you need to learn about how to deal with things that are bleeding, sometimes even profusely. One thing that you should have on hand are gauze pads that are sterile that you can put on a wound and then use some wrapping around it. This will help bleeders to clot. If you just have a wound that you're putting a lot of different bandages on over a period of time, your veterinarian might advise you to have Telfa pads that do not stick to the wound the way gauze will, because gauze is made of cotton. This is actually made of a latex base. And this, I'm sure you've seen that at home. It's got a very shiny finish. This is a sterile pad right here, and this would go directly onto the wound. If there is a dressing that's to be put on there, having a triple antibiotic ointment that is dedicated only to use with your first aid kit. It's not something that you sort of grab and throw in the horse trailer without the rest of your first aid kit. You want to keep everything together. After you put the initial dressing on, you need to learn from your veterinarian, from workshops, from reading articles on the appropriate way to bandage a leg. Many of you are used to putting on shipping boots with the Velcro. That's real easy. That's very different from a first aid bandage on a lower leg, or even stacking one from a lower leg and putting another bandage onto the upper forearm. So you're stacking the bandage all the way up the leg. Some things to have on hand are obviously leg wraps to keep either a shipping bandage like this on. It all depends on the type of wound and what you're going to use. You also have some rolled cotton that you can wrap around a leg. And then if you have this, you're either going to need a very sharp knife or, even better, scissors to cut it off at the correct length. On top of that, you might use something like bandages. You might want to use something like vet wrap to secure that bandage in place. For cotton wraps, you can also use something like Elasticon. That is a very sticky kind of bandage that also has some elasticity. Again, you need to be familiar with these different types of bandaging materials and when to use them. In a pinch, when all else has failed and you haven't prepared adequately, diapers and duct tape can cure the world. And if you practice and you've got diapers and duct tape, you can bandage quite a few things. A few other things that you can add to your basic first aid kit. Tweezers are nice to have. If you have a very small splinter, obviously not something around the eye, but something that you know is fairly superficial, but it's too small to grab with your fingers, tweezers are very handy to have around, as are alcohol wipes. This is one of those cold packs that you can get from virtually any department store, and you take it out of this, crush it, and it turns into a cold pack if you need to put cold therapy on something that's obviously going to start to swell. Sometimes you can't get close enough to a horse to put an antibiotic ointment on with a bandage. You might have to do something like a spray. And so an antiseptic spray or an antibacterial spray that you can use from a distance with a fractious horse is something that you should also have on hand. A few other things, some sort of detergent. It can be Ivory soap or Dove or Dawn. I know I had the occasion once of I put a fly spray on my horse and he happened to have an adverse reaction to that. And the first aid thing to do for me, a chemical was involved. I put on nitrile gloves. I had soap and a bucket and water, and I washed all that pesticide off of his skin because it was getting absorbed into his skin and he was having an adverse reaction to it. So just having some plain things like gloves and soap and water is great first aid. Peroxide sometimes is used for some superficial wounds to be used as a cleaning agent. alcohol, whether it's in swabs or whether it's in bottle form like this, since you also have gauze pads. If you need to, if you're directed to clean around a wound with some alcohol. If you're directed by a veterinarian to keep an eye moist until they're able to get there, having some contact, very general purpose contact lens solution, sterile saline that you can gently drop into the eye. Sometimes you might need to keep that eye moist if an animal cannot blink because of an eyelid laceration, for example. That might be you might be directed by your veterinarian to do that kind of procedure. Another instrument that is quite nice to use, this is a 60 cc dose syringe, and if you need to gently rinse a wound, let's say it's very filthy with mud, it's encrusted with dried blood, but it's not actively bleeding, something that has a low pressure, you're not going to want to throw the water hose on it with high pressure because you don't want to drive any dirt, wood chips or something more deeply into that wound, but using something like a dose syringe that you can just gently lavage or flush that wound out is something that's handy to have. But probably one of the best things to do is to learn about first aid, learn when you should call your veterinarian, know how to take vital signs so that you can report things accurately to a veterinarian, and know how to bandage legs. Those are some of the very basic things that, that you should know whenever you have a horse. So for more information, you can go to thehorse.com for information on first aid. The American Association of Equine Practitioners have owner brochures. The library has great books on horse owning, horse care, by being a horse owner, and there's usually a first aid chapter in some of those books. So learn how to do things, get someone to teach you how to put on different types of bandages in the correct way, and above all, try to keep your cool.